We're in an era of great prize fights these days, except that they're unusual in that the prize fighters are economists. Conservative and liberal economists now disagree on the origins of the financial crisis, the bank bailout, the need for deficit spending, and the proposed healthcare plan. So we have organized a titanic face-off between two of the most famous economists in the world on either side of these debates. The Nobel Prize winner and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, on the right but actually on the left. He's the bigger stimulus side, and Stanford University scholar John Taylor. He is the monster deficit side. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's start with the origins of the crisis. You wrote a book where you say the crisis is fundamentally caused by government, not by the market. I think it would be fair to say that governments around the world learned the lessons from the 1930s, or learned what they thought the lessons of the 1930s were, and have reacted very strongly. They've pumped massive amounts of liquidity into the system. Is this a good idea?
No, I don't think it is. I think basically it's a large overreaction. You know, even last year in February, a stimulus package was passed. A lot of enthusiasm for it. Checks were sent to people. It didn't do anything.
And you had to do pumping massive amounts of liquidity into the system. And this has been really bad. If you look at it from a global point of view, the fall in industrial production has been every bit as large as it was in the first year of the Great Depression. The fall in trade has been larger than it was in the first year of the Great Depression. You really do need to do drastic things now. This is scary stuff. We've been staring into the abyss.
You say that in doing all this, you're creating the risk of inflation.
I believe you are. I think we're in massive deficits. The debt to GDP ratio, good measure of our ability to pay is GDP, so it's going from roughly 40% to 80%. Quite frankly, you go back to my analysis of why this was caused. I think it was really an overreaction by government. It scared people. The markets collapsed last fall, especially in September and October. That's when you see these big declines Paul's referring to, exports declining, consumption declining. It basically stabilized in early as December and January. We don't know what's going to happen.
But you're saying that it was Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke going up to Congress and scaring the hell out of them to get the $700 billion that sent the economy into a shock.
Big part of it, absolutely.
Now, let me ask you this. You were very, very unhappy with the administration's plan to deal with the banking crisis. You wrote this very famous column which said the plan fills me with despair. You said that you needed to nationalize the banks temporarily to deal with the problem. The banks haven't been nationalized. It appears that the financial system has stabilized and credit is coming back. So were you wrong then, or are you wrong now?
You know, I think I was... put it this, first of all, it's not at all clear that credit is coming back. What we see is some recovery in some markets. And it may be that it works out all right, but the banks are still weak. They're still kind of crippled. I wanted a much more aggressive response. I still think that would have been the right thing to do given what we knew. It's by no means clear that we're out of the woods. Look, they might, I think, you know, I can always go through my record and find out that I didn't say this, but I think I conceded that it might work out. But that seemed to me that the riskier course was, in fact, to hope for the best as opposed to taking really firm action. At this point, I'm not pushing hard on it because it's clear that they're going to wait and see.
And do you feel like the financial industry is stabilizing?
Look, the way I look at it is I'm not sure what's happening with the financial industry. What I do know is that the real economy is nowhere close to stabilizing. We just got a new report on new unemployment claims, which are still running at a level suggesting that the economy is hemorrhaging jobs. This is still nowhere near. No green shoots. Those green shoots look awfully brown from here. There's no sign that things have stopped getting worse at a rapid pace. So we have not done enough. Now, maybe a more forceful bank policy would have helped. I was also thought the stimulus wasn't big enough, and this is going to be a real problem because when the stimulus isn't big enough, people don't respond to the outcome by saying, oh, we need to do more. They respond by saying, oh, the policy failed. So we have, in fact, fallen short. I'm quite concerned that Obama, although doing things in the right direction, is behind the curve because they haven't been big enough.
Do you think that the economy has stabilized?
I saw the stabilization really back in like December, January. You had a real collapse. Exports, consumption, it's sort of flattened out. It's picked up slightly, but I agree. It's going to be some tough times ahead.
But it sounds to me like you're saying we had a financial catastrophe, but we're going through a kind of somewhat normal, worse than normal recession.
It's worse than normal because of the catastrophe, absolutely. But we're now, in a period where we should be able to see some growth in the third and fourth quarter, but it's not going to be strong, and we will get increases in unemployment. In the meantime, I think the stimulus is not helping. I actually think it's somewhat counterproductive.
How can it not help? I mean, you're creating demand.
Well, actually, quite a little bit, quite frankly. You go to the White House website, of the $787 billion package, only 53 has gone out the door, and only, believe it or not, less than $500 million, 373 million, is infrastructure spending so far. So it's just not enough to do anything substantial.
We knew that was going to happen, right? I mean, it was essentially impossible to have a lot of spending take place before 6 months in.
No, a lot of things were promised. I think people.
No, they were pretty
that.
Clear on it. I mean, they lowballed their forecast for what unemployment would do, which is a problem. But this is what we all said. This is going to be a slow time, and it is kind of crazy, by the way. The people saying, "Oh, it's 4 months since Obama signed this bill, and where's the recovery? The plan has failed." We actually haven't had a chance to test it at all yet.
Well, I think that's part of the problem with the policy. You just can't deliver that rapidly. So in the meantime, it could come too late. And in the meantime, you get higher interest rates from this. This is
I don't buy that at all.
Okay. And oil prices are rising.
Let's get to interest rates in a second. But what's wrong with the argument that if what you're trying to do is create rapid increase in purchasing power, that a tax cut, a permanent tax cut, would actually deliver it faster?
So we do a permanent tax cut every time the economy is weakening. And then what do we do when the economy is strengthening? Have a permanent tax increase?
So
but then in that case, it's not. There's a logical problem here. Okay. You can't have a ratchet where you always cut taxes and never raise them. Eventually, we end up with no government at all, which is, I guess, some people's goal. But you can't do that.
So I think it would have been somebody who wrote arguing for a permanent tax cut.
Absolutely. I think actually, I recommended that President Obama come in and get his middle-class tax cut established permanently at the beginning. His make work pay credit would have been good, been permanent, would have been something that people could count on. I think that would begin to have some more effect.
Wouldn't that have effects on the deficits that you worry about?
I think really the problem with the deficit now, quite frankly, is just massive spending growth. We have a deficit of $1.2 trillion forecast by the CBO 10 years from now. And tax revenues then, income tax, about $2 trillion. So you'd have to have a 60% increase in taxes to close that deficit. That's not going to happen. So it's really, to me, it's a spending issue.
These are all nominal figures. The fact of the matter is that we're still, in the United States, we're spending not a high proportion of GDP by comparison with other advanced countries. Not all that, this is, the point is that we do have some things that we want the government to do. We want it to provide a basic social safety net. We want it to provide adequate national defense. You have to raise the taxes to pay for that. And you can't just decide that we're going to set tax levels permanently set tax levels based on what the state of the business cycle is right now. That's not, that way lies madness. That way lies an impossible task of trying to fit your long-term spending plans to what you do in the heat of the moment to respond to a business cycle. This is why you need spending programs to fight this kind of recession.
We will be back with our clash of the economist titans right after this. And we are back with our prize-fighting economists, Paul Krugman versus John Taylor. Explain why you think that even though we do have these large deficits and the entitlement program suggests even larger ones, right now you don't think that interest